Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We want to welcome you to the inaugural show, St. Hill Reports. I am Tommie St. My first guest is Louis Frank Thomas, an educator and also a political activist in the city of Philadelphia. But today, we will discuss the crisis in public education in Philadelphia. Hello, Louis.
Hello.
Louis, can we discuss the crisis, the looming crisis, and the ever-ending cloud that's always hanging over public education, including the budget, the underfunding of education in Philadelphia?
Sure. I think that there are a number of issues and challenges that any urban public school system faces on a regular basis. Philadelphia has some very unique challenges based upon how our system is set up. One, we were one of the first major cities in this country to be able to begin charter schools about now almost 20 years ago. And as a result of that, that really turned our public school system on its head, because it actually began to establish schools that begin to compete with regular public schools. And the reason why that's important in relation to the question that you asked about budgeting is because any child that comes out of a regular public school, their funding follows them to whatever school they go to. So that if they go to a charter school, that per pupil allowance follows that child to the school, which means that those resources, those monies come out of the regular public school system.
Okay. And Louis, I've noticed, and everybody knows, and this has been a topic of discussion politically, when Ed Rendell was the governor of Pennsylvania, he increased funding for education, public education, every budget for the 8 years that he was governor. When Governor Corbett was elected, the first thing he did was cut education, 30%. How is that affecting the way that the schools are being underfunded?
I think that it can be seen in a number of ways. I think number one, we have a Republican-controlled legislature both on the Senate side and on the House side, and we have a governor who's a Republican sitting in the governor's mansion. And I think it was clearly a slight at Philadelphia, because Philadelphia receives the majority of state funding to any school system because we are the largest system in the state. But we also are the largest contributor in terms of tax dollars to the entire state budget of Pennsylvania. So, but I think that it was a slight at Philadelphia. Both state houses side now, both of those leaders are from Western Pennsylvania. None of them are from Philadelphia. And over the years, Philadelphia had been in full control. We had Dwight Evans, who was a Philadelphia rep on appropriations. We had Governor Rendell, a former Philadelphia mayor, in the governor's mansion. And so funding was continually and consistently increased. I think that one of the things that they decided to do as soon as they got control of the state house was to make sure that they would make Philadelphia suffer a little bit. And I think you see that in the new budget. He has cut Philadelphia by almost 30%, cut its public school funding, which has left us with a deficit of almost $45 million in the upcoming school fiscal year, which has caused many, many problems for not only the public school system, but for the city. Because if our children don't have the resources, the monies, access that they need to school, then obviously that will cause other problems in our communities throughout the city of Philadelphia, vis-a-vis violence, vis-a-vis students not being able to have the adequate materials they need in order to be successful and compete with other young people around the country.
Another question before we get to some other topics that I want to discuss with you. Over the years, I'm a product of public education, as are you. And when I was growing up, public education was pretty good. There's a lot of good people came from public education. Since I've been an adult, since I could remember, there's always been a revolving door of superintendents. We have a superintendent that 1 year, we have a superintendent the second year. In terms of consistency, what does that do to the quality of education when you have to change a superintendent every 2 or 3 years before their programs be put in place?
Right. It causes a major problem, because if you have a superintendent come in, it's the same thing if you have a brand new school teacher in a classroom. In their first year, they're a brand new teacher, so you're not going to see the fruits of their labor come into existence, the impact that they have upon the students. And it's the same thing with the superintendent. If a superintendent creates a 5 to 10 year strategic plan for a school district, but they're only there for 3 years and they begin implementation the second year they're there, then that causes obviously an imbalance, and it causes instability in the system. And so that's what we've had in Philadelphia over this period of time. We've had so many different superintendents that it has caused instability in the system. Whereas our most recent superintendent, Dr. Arlene Ackerman, she had the Vision 2015, and so she created this long-term plan to be able to improve Philadelphia's public schools. Well, now she is gone after 3.5 years from the school system. And so, and now we will have a new superintendent that will come in with a new vision and a new strategic plan that may be very vastly different from what she decided to do. And it was the same thing when she came in. I mean, the things that Paul Vallis had put in place when he was a superintendent, it was a very different kind of system. I mean, just the structure of central administration was different. Just how they engaged public schools, the kind of autonomy principals had in schools were very, very different. Dr. Ackerman came in and changed all that around. Now we're looking again to another superintendent entering our school system and creating a new vision.
And on that point, I was speaking to one of the elected officials in City Council just recently, and this City Council person is very involved in education issues. And she told me, she said, Tommie, because of the lack of consistency, the last 3 or 4 superintendents has literally been kicked out of Philadelphia. They came in with good reputations and been kicked out of Philadelphia. She is on the search committee for another superintendent. She is saying now that the superintendents are reluctant to come to Philadelphia because of the instability. And they see what happened to their predecessors. How is this affecting the search?
Well, it's going to affect the quality of superintendent that we're going to be able to get here in Philadelphia, because the top-notch superintendents are not going to be interested in coming to a system that has had this kind of political rancor ongoing for the past 40 years in a system. Nobody wants to be a part of that. Nobody wants to come into a system and have their reputation tarnished and ruined. Paul Vallis left under a cloud. So did Dr. Ackerman leave under a cloud. Before Paul Vallis, Hornbeck left under a cloud. So all of these folk that have come into the Philadelphia school system to work, who came in with stellar reputations. Vallis came from Chicago, had reformed that system. Ackerman came from Oakland, California, and Washington, D.C., where she had reformed the system with a wonderful reputation of training spectacular principals. And they both left with tarnished records and tarnished reputations based upon the politics that has invaded public education here in the city of Philadelphia and in the state of Pennsylvania, really.
Let's talk about violence in public schools and what people consider as some of the schools being like prisons. Is there anything that the school district can do in the face of being cut? There have been cuts in security, there's been cuts in police, but the violence is increasing. What do you see as an educator who has ran a number of schools, who has been principals, and has ran a number of educational organizations? What do you see as a solution to cut down on the violence and to make students safer going to school?
I mean, I have a very strong opinion on this issue. I mean, one, I do not believe that schools are a place for metal detectors, and it should never be made like prisons. I'm a believer that if you treat young people like they're prisoners, they will act like prisoners. And so I've never been somebody who's been a proponent of metal detectors. Furthermore, the National Education Opportunity Association reported last year that in over 70% of the schools where metal detectors were housed, they did not prevent violence, that the violence was at the same level that they were at before they had the metal detectors. So that means the metal detectors haven't worked. In terms of keeping our students safe, I think it speaks to what we need to do as a community, as a society, and as a city in order to re-engage our young people. I think that we have to provide access to them for activities after and before school, so there are places for them to go to be able to get recreation. The cutbacks on sports and on the arts have also impacted upon our students not having anything to do after school. So if you have a bunch of schools who are cutting football teams, cutting basketball teams, cutting track and field, cutting the band, then students don't have the ability to actually participate in extracurricular activities. And so they're just coming to school and going home and trying to figure out what to do between the hours of 3 and 8 p.m., which typically is getting into trouble. So first, the city has to provide an answer. in terms of making sure that we're able to provide our young people with access to opportunities outside of school, whether that's after school jobs program, whether that are after school activities, whether that's recreation centers remaining open a little later. Those are some of the things that we have to do. From the school, at the school level, in terms of what the school system can do, the school system has to figure out when they're kind of trying to tweak their budget, how they can continue to keep these other important components that I believe are as important as academics for students, which are sports and the arts within the school system. Students need an outlet, and they also need to develop a strong worldview. And that worldview does not just include learning math, reading, and writing. It also includes being able to be exposed to other things. It means team building through playing on a football team or a baseball team. It means being in a band by being able to develop their musical instincts and talents, which helps them to study better, which actually enables them to be more engaged in a classroom. And so I think that all of those things are some of the solutions that I would say. I mean, if I was superintendent of the public school system, when I was doing my budget, I would be working to try to keep some of those programs in, because I believe that it's essential for the success of our students.
Let's discuss private schools, charter schools, and their impact on public schools. Are they adding or are they taking away from the quality of education that public school students are receiving? Can you comment on
Sure.
that?
I think that there are challenges on both sides. I mean, obviously, I've been the principal of a public school and I've been the principal of a charter school. I think that there are benefits to charter schools. I think that there are as many good charter schools as there are good quality public schools. I think there are as many bad charter schools as there are bad public schools. I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any imbalance between the two, if you will. And people try to purport that charter schools are so much better. That's untrue. That's a myth.
Okay.
And so I would start off by saying that the second thing that I would say is that in terms of resource allocations, the unions would argue that charter schools have taken money from the public schools, from the regular traditional public schools, as a result of them being established. Now, if it was up to the Republicans, both in the U.S. House and the State House of Pennsylvania, there would be no public school systems throughout the entire state of Pennsylvania. They would all be charter schools, or we would have only school vouchers. That's what they want. That's the goal of the Republicans. That's the goal of a Republican administration. And that's the reason why, in fact, Governor Corbett is working to cut public education, because their goal is to have entire systems of just charter schools and just private schools that receive public dollars through school vouchers. That's the goal of the Republican Party. It's written, in fact, it's written in their 10-year plan that's what they would like public school systems to look, because their goal is to do away with unions, do away with those type of protections, so that they can be able to decide how they control those systems and infrastructures.
Aren't students under the United States Constitution and under our state law guaranteed an education?
They are guaranteed an education. They are guaranteed a free education, but they aren't guaranteed how that education has to be delivered, which is the place that the Republicans have been able to determine how they're going to kind of rearrange and change education. When Hurricane Katrina happened in New Orleans, where actually Paul Vallis is now as a superintendent of a system that is all charter, it wiped out their entire public school system. And so there are no more public schools in the city of New Orleans. They only have charters there, and it has been a mess since it started. They have not been successful because there's been no centralized administration that has been able to govern how these schools operate. When you open up a charter school, it's like opening up your own corporation. They have an opportunity to determine their own benchmarks. They have an opportunity to determine what their goals and objectives are going to be for their school, and there's very little oversight, and has been very little oversight, from the State Board of Education and regular public schools. They are autonomous schools with their own boards. And so there's very little that any centralized administration can say to a charter school in terms of making sure they're meeting a certain standard. And so that's kind of the murky area that you have with charter schools, so that if you don't have a good charter school, if you don't have a good charter school board, if you don't have a good charter school leader, then you have a bunch of schools out here that can kind of do whatever they want to do and then provide an inadequate education to the young people that are going there.
Well, since it's public money, don't charter schools have an obligation, and don't they have to meet certain standards in terms of educating students? I teach at a charter school, mathematics, civics, and science charter school, ran by Dr. Veronica Joyner. And her school is one of the best charter schools in the city, and they've passed state accreditation every year. don't charter schools have the same criteria? I mean, if they failing 50% of their students, isn't it a point where the funding will be cut off?
Well, the problem is that most charter schools have 10-year contracts. They're typically up for review in 5 years. So if you say a charter school has a 10-year contract with the State Board of Education and the public school system here in Philadelphia, or the SRC rather, then you're talking about 10 years. If a school is doing horrific, you're talking about them being allowed for 10 years to do horrific things to children. And then after that 10 years, they can be rejected. Over the past couple of years, the SRC and the State Board of Education have become a little bit more diligent in ensuring that charter schools are meeting certain basic standards. But the role of charter schools is not that they have to meet specific standards, but they have to meet a set of basic standards that are applied to all schools within the state of Pennsylvania, public and or charter. So the problem that we have here is that although they have these requirements to meet AYP, if you have a 10-year contract and you're a failing school, then you're going to be a failing school for 10 years. And so it's not going to matter. And so, in mathematics, civics, and science, charter school is one of the top schools, not only in the city, but they're one of the top schools in the state. And that's because they have a great educational leader. She has been able to build a great program. She has a spectacular board, but all charter schools aren't able to do that. And they operate in such autonomy that they have the ability to kind of do whatever it is that they want to do.
And she got me teaching journalism.
Okay.
But let's get back to the SRC. For some of our viewers, they don't know what the SRC stands for. The School Reform Commission. And the School Reform Commission, since it's been in existence, has been a disaster.
Absolutely.
It's supposed to, the School Reform Commission is supposed to police the schools and make sure the schools meet certain criteria. But just like the superintendent, they have boards that flip-flops and they get caught in conflicts of interest. How can we fix the SRC?
Yeah, I mean, the original intent of the SRC when we did away with our Board of Education that was autonomous here in the city of Philadelphia was supposed to be to come in and to be able to fix the bureaucracy that runs the bureaucracy of the public school system.
Right.
Well, in fact, they did not do that. The SRC has appointments from the governor, from the mayor, and from other people and from the state house members and the state senate that were supposed to help to impact upon how education was delivered in Philadelphia, and that was when we were doing really badly. Well, the SRC hasn't met that standard. In fact, they've done about the same as our elected Board of Education used to do when they used to be here in the city of Philadelphia. They've done no better. In fact, they've been even more unstable than that system. I remember when Rotan Lee used to be the president of the school board when I was in school here.
I remember.
And at that time,
fine gentleman.
Yeah. And I was the late Rotan Lee, and I was the president of the Philadelphia Student Union at the time, and so I would go meet with him in his office when they were down on the Parkway at that time, once a month. I would have lunch with him once a month in his office. And he provided access to students. Everyone loved him. He was really engaged in the educational process. Right now in the public school system, most of the teachers, they don't even know who the SRC is. They don't know who these people are. They don't know where they come from. None of them are educators. None of them have really ever been engaged in education in a serious way. And so you just have other bureaucrats and technocrats that they have gotten from who are appointed from all these different politicians who are also not educators to come in and run a school system. And I just think it does not work. And there is no citizen representation on that commission. And so you don't even have the community, parents, or other people having a say-so in how education is being delivered to their students. The National Higher Education Association did a study about 2 years ago about school boards. And they said school boards that actually have parents representative of the school board are usually 80 times more successful in terms of being able to get quality policy passed for those school systems. And school systems like Chicago, like Philadelphia, who have no citizen representation on those commissions, usually are a lot less successful because they're run by bureaucrats and technocrats and politicians who really don't understand the full scope of public education and what's needed. All they know is that there's a budget that needs to be done and that they vote on a bunch of things that they don't really understand. I think that the SRC here in Philadelphia really needs to be done away with. I think that our school system deserves a citizen-represented school board that represents the people that live here in this city, that are from this city, so that they can have the kind of representation on that board, and also so that the people of the city of Philadelphia can take some ownership over our own children's future and what we want our city to look like.
The picture you just portrayed to the viewers is a very bleak picture of education. We have children, parents of public school children that can't afford to send their children to private schools. Mm-hmm. They're sending them to charter schools, so it's actually depleting the classes mm-hmm. and the student body of the public schools. So that means they're getting less, that's why they're closing mm-hmm. schools, they're getting less funding. Mm-hmm. And if the trend continues, there won't be any public schools. So what do we do as parents, what do we do as citizens and as elected officials to reverse that trend of deteriorating schools?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that it's a trend that can be reversed. The Obama administration is a supporter of taking over systems and of charter schools. I mean, it is something within the next 20 years there will probably be very few public school systems as we know them right now. The majority of systems in major cities in this country will be majority of charter schools. And that's something that's being supported by the Obama administration. I mean, the Obama administration had this whole plan, Race to the Top, last year, where they had allotted $200 million that they were giving out to major school systems and cities all over this country. But the caveat is that these were school systems that had to put in place 3 basic reforms. The first reform was to do away with collective bargaining at a certain level with teachers' unions. The second reform was that they had to have a certain amount of charter schools in their systems, and that they were continually opening up charter schools in their systems. And the third was pension reform within school systems in conjunction with all of the unions that are associated with school systems. What does that say to you? That says to you that we have not only a Republican administration here in the state of Pennsylvania, but we also have a national administration whose goal now is to do away with public school systems as we know it. And we have to remember, the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, came from Chicago. He was the superintendent from Chicago, which is where Paul Vallis came from. And it was in Chicago that they have turned over almost 70% of the public school to charter schools. And so it's very interesting that he will become our Secretary of Education. So that gives you an indication as to the direction that we're moving in public education. That doesn't mean that it has to be bleak, because if we have citizen representation, and if the community stands up and says that we're going to have a voice with regard to how education is delivered to our children, then there will be a shift in power in terms of our representation at charter schools and how we control them and how we engage those schools. Those are still public dollars. Those are still tax dollars. And so citizens do have a right to have a say both in what happens in charter schools and what happens in the regular public school system. But parents have to know that they have those rights. And most parents have an idea that charter schools are still considered private schools, that they're not really they don't really operate under the auspices of the public school system, but in fact they do. In fact, they are tax dollars. In fact, they are public schools where any student has the ability to be able to attend a charter school if there is space. They are not able to deny access to any child to any charter school for any reason, although some charter schools have done it over the past couple of years who just haven't been very forthcoming.
Okay, Louis, and finally, before we wrap up, I want to get your assessment, because you are a successful educator, to parents who are watching this program. What can you tell them in terms of setting them at ease and the solutions that will help improve public schools? Or is it a complete loss? Should they start looking for other schools to put their children in?
No, nothing is a complete loss. There are still some spectacular, comprehensive public schools here within the city of Philadelphia. There are also some spectacular charter school options. here within the city of Philadelphia. We still have a number of well-known, very successful magnet schools here in the city of Philadelphia which are blue ribbon schools, from Bodine to Central to Girls High to Masterman are all blue ribbon public schools. Greenfield are all blue ribbon schools. And so as a result of that, I think that we need to figure out what is the formula that these public schools are using to allow students and young people to be successful, and the public school system needs to duplicate that formula rather than handing over our public schools to charter school organizations.
But those schools that you just mentioned has always been the elite public schools. Greenfield, I have a granddaughter that attends Greenfield. The only reason why she attends Greenfield, you have to be a city resident. And I live in Center City. If she was living in neighborhoods, any neighborhoods, whether they're white, Hispanic, or black, and they lower income neighborhoods, she wouldn't be able to attend Greenfield.
Right.
Masterman, they take all of the brightest students, put them in Masterman, and concentrate on them, but then and to the other schools, they put the slower students. So Masterman and the schools you just mentioned, they've always been elite schools,
right?
Because they always put elite students in there.
So what I would say is that there are some successful neighborhood schools. Spring Garden Elementary, which 90% of the students are low income, many of them come from Richard Allen projects, has been a successful school. It is a blue ribbon school. Bryant Elementary at 6th and Brown, another 90% lower income. Most of their students are from Pentown projects. Also a blue ribbon school, neighborhood school. So there are some neighborhood schools, A.B. Day in Mount Airy. I think they have something like 70% low income, but another blue ribbon public school. So these are not schools that have typically sent the elite, but these are schools who are meeting AYP every year. These are schools that are meeting their standards, and these are blue ribbon schools. So there are some neighborhood schools who are being successful in addition to some of those elite schools. But I don't understand why it has taken us this long to duplicate the formula and the model that magnet schools in Philadelphia and the elite schools in Philadelphia have used to be able. Why can't we use that same formula and same model for neighborhood schools in the city? And I'll tell you why. Because of classism, as you just mentioned, and of racism here in this city. That poor white people in South Philly and Northeast Philadelphia, and poor black and Latino people in North Philly and West Philly, our systems have not been given the kind of resources, we haven't been given the kind of qualified teachers that those schools had, and we've not been given the great leaders that those schools have had an opportunity to have over the years, or the attention and resources that they need in order to be successful. And I think that citizens have to begin to demand from the school system, why can't we have the same formula as Greenfield or as Masterman? Because Greenfield, every school in the city of Philadelphia, we have something called a balanced a proprietary system in Philadelphia, which means that just because a school is in Center City does not mean that they get more tax dollars if it's a public school. They're supposed to receive the same allocation as any other public school in the city of Philadelphia, because we have that proprietary system in place, and that's in our city charter, that all schools are in our proprietary economic system. Well, obviously that's not what's been being done. That in a school like Greenfield and Center City, we do see more resources, we do see a more qualified teacher corps, we do see a more qualified principals and leaders of those schools, and when we compare them with a school like Clymer, which is deep in North Philly, is 7th and Huntingdon, and we look at the quality of teachers, the quality of the leadership at the school, it looks vastly different from what Greenfield looks like. That should not be. But citizens must demand of their elected officials that they speak out on their behalf. We elect these people to office so that they can speak out on our behalf and make sure that our schools and our communities are doing well and that our children have access to being able to be successful. And that's something that the community has to stand up and do, and it's something that I've been fighting for over the past number of years in terms of trying to ensure that our young people have an opportunity to have access to the same quality of education as anybody at Central, Masterman, Mastbaum, or any of these other successful magnet schools in the city.
Louis, I want to thank you very much for joining St. Hill Reports. I am sure our viewers were educated and your comments was really taken to heart. I also want to thank you for being my guest. I'm Tommie St. Hill. See you next time.